What is good, everybody, man? Thank you guys tuning in to another episode of One Big Fire. Super excited for today's episode. We've got a special guest in the house. Before we do the quick introductions, kind of getting everything live, getting going here, want to throw a quick reminder out there. We have a very very dear event to us coming up. We get to piggyback Al Stasek's. What are we, almost 10 years, Al?
Going on 10, next year will be 10 years, yeah.
So 9 years of rock and rescue in the Cleveland, in Cleveland, and we're taking advantage of that event to piggyback our Agent to CEO live event. We've got just a tremendous cast of characters for that event, something that's core to me, very dear to me, as well as Cuz. And so you guys can go to agenttoceocle.com, get all the information, get your tickets, get registered. Not a scarcity play. We just don't have room for very many people. So tickets are there till they last, till they run out. So Agent to CEO, come join us next month in Cleveland. Al, set the stage for us, brother.
Man, Jeff, it's funny because we're all sort of meeting at the same time. And it's way long overdue. Yeah. We were just at Put-in-Bay Island, which I know you guys have both, Jay and John have both stayed on the boat up at Put-in-Bay. We introduced them to the island with our buddy Gadosh. And I'm up in Detroit at the Build event, and I got to meet one of Jeff's top coaches. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry. Forgetting the gentleman's name.
Justin, and Jackie. Jackie was there too.
Yes, and Jackie. Justin blew me away. Jackie's been a longtime friend. I didn't even know Jackie was coaching for you. And then our other friend, Jason, said, Jeff's taking his boat up to Put-in-Bay this weekend. I'm like, well, I'm taking mine up to the Detroit Yacht Club, which is where Jeff docks. And you're going to love this, Jay. I'm getting back from day 2 of the event. I'm kind of excited to get back to the dock to meet Jeff because I think he's docked like 4 or 5 slips from where I had my boat. Mm-hmm. And I'm coming down there and I get the message from Jeff. He's like, dude, I just took off for Put-in-Bay at 11 o'clock at night. I was like, that's
honey badger move.
Like gangster level than me. Captain. So
we wanted to wake up there, we wanted to wake up and Put-in-Bay. Like when you're on a cruise ship, you wake up the next day and you're at a new island. That's what we wanted.
Right. There you go.
He was determined, and he certainly did get there. Like maybe on some fumes, but he got there nonetheless safe. So
the gas gauge might have said 1%.
Oh boy, yeah, that's scary.
Yeah. But we had a real fun time, hanging out, mingling a little bit. And honestly, Jeff, it was just this last minute we were going to talk about this. I was talking to Jackie yesterday. This was going to be our topic. It seems to be the hottest topic out there. Yeah. A lot of people there's a lot of fear floating around. We know that fear and anxiety is just because they haven't learned. And there's the fear is just they just don't have the knowledge, that ignorance of what direction to go.
Sure.
The crazy thing with we're this new era that we're entering into right now is no one really has the exact rules. Like no one knows. We're just trying to make our own interpretation of what we're seeing in front of us and saying, okay, what do they want us to do? How do we not get sued for a 9-figure amount again? And a lot of fear, not just with agents, but with brokers. But last minute, you said yes. I know you're a super busy man because I get your text messages every week on an event you're doing here in Cleveland, all over real proud of what you've built, man. It's really amazing to watch what you've done. And we're really happy to have you on here.
Happy to be here.
Awesome. So John, what we wanted to really kind of chat about is the idea of there's a lot of different opinions floating out there. one school of thought, and I know we've seen these. If you go to any of the big Facebook groups where there's tens of thousands of agents on there, we have agents buying riders that say, I'm not claiming this is what you should be charging. So we're gonna let me put that disclaimer out there, but literally have signs that say 3% commission to buyers agents offered on this home, or they're trying to come up with these crazy go around to really what they're trying to do, in my opinion, is they're trying to practice the same way that I've practiced for the last 26 years, the same way that everyone's practiced for the last 30, 40 years, 4 decades. And I believe we have to have a new mindset in how we move forward.
Yeah.
And, the workarounds aren't going to work out for everyone in the way they think they are. That's just my opinion.
So let's set the stage, right? So how have the rules of engagement, how's the game changed, right? So what do we know to be true today that we know August 17th? And then like what is DOJ, what are they saying, right? Like what is the actual, let's talk facts, right? Let's get the truth. And then we can say, okay, well, here's EXP stance, here's KW stance. And then we can kind of give our perspective from what we're seeing. I mean, you look at, over 50 years of experience in the real estate industry on this one Zoom. So we can kind of share from our perspective of right, wrong, kind of where we don't have the crystal ball, but where we kind of see with the indicators where things are going to go and how things should play out. So let's talk facts. Like, how has the game changed? Like, what's the foundation? What are the rules? What's DOJ saying?
What do you think, Jeff?
Yeah, so obviously we know you cannot communicate any commission via the MLS, and there seems to be a lot of confusion around, and some MLSs are actually even interpreting it incorrectly, in my opinion. You are legally able to offer concessions, and you can communicate that legally. The Department of Justice and NAR says you can communicate concessions via the MLS, but some MLSs are saying, we don't care that they said that that's allowed, and we're not going to allow it. And so I do think there's going to be some gray area with those MLSs, because I'm sorry, if I'm an agent listing and selling real estate in that area, I'm putting it right in the remarks, and I'm taking the fine, and I'm taking that all the way, because the NAR and the Department of Justice said you can offer concessions via the MLS. And a lot of agents are saying to me, well, Jeff, but they're also saying you can still offer out, and here's where it's also confusing. Technically, you can sign a listing agreement with a seller that says you are going to split your commission with the buyer broker. That is legal. That has actually not changed. What's changed is you cannot communicate that via the MLS. So, a lot of agents are saying, well, Jeff, why are you pushing us? Because I'm pushing people towards offering concessions. Why not just, like you said, do the sign rider, or, have a standard email that goes out to every single agent that shows your listing? Well, because the MLS is the most efficient way to communicate information such as previously commissioned and now concessions. And so if my MLS is going to allow it, which as of right now they are, then I'm going to be advertising the commission as concessions. And the seller's going to know they have a choice. Of course, we have to change the language and make sure they understand they have a choice in the amount that they want to offer out. But you absolutely 1000% can offer it as concessions. And if your MLS allows it, that's the most efficient way to do it, versus continuing to call it a commission. I think that there's a chance, and I'm now just speculating, but there's a chance they could come back and say, wait a minute, nope, we weren't clear enough. You guys are not communicating this to sellers that they have a choice in how much they want to pay out. So you can't advertise commissions anywhere. That is a possibility. I mean, that's just hypothetical, but what they are saying is you can advertise concessions on the MLS. So if we can advertise concessions and they can go towards their buyers, closing costs, prepaids, real estate brokerage fees, then that's the easiest way to do this. And that doesn't change a whole lot in what you're presenting at the kitchen table either.
Right.
So take kind of the stance, right? So I think, Leo and EXP has been, pretty loud and kind of at the forefront of running with this. So just kind of, cause if you want to kind of break down kind of, what Leo is saying and what EXP stance is, of how to handle this and move forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think their stance is they're just trying not to get sued. And clearly, communicating that there's no offer of compensation to to the, buyer's agent on a transaction. So, that's, while I completely understand it, I think, the thing that gets great for me is that every MLS is maybe handling this different. And I've seen some MLSs have a checkbox, yes, we'll offer concessions versus no, not offering concessions. But it seems to me that this is going to come down to how each individual agent communicates to a seller, what to expect in terms of an offer coming in. But where it gets confusing is when agents, they want to call an agent, and say, hey, are you offering a concession on this deal or whatever? And there was a post yesterday I saw that someone called EXP directly and asked, and they said, you're welcome to write that in an offer on any of our properties. But they opted not to view that property because it was unclear as to whether there was going to be compensation for the buyer's agent. And I think that comes down to probably the weakness in the negotiation of the agent to to negotiate their fee up front and then say, hey, we're going to ask the seller to pay our commission. That's how we've done it for as long as I can remember. And so, there's so many agents out there that are onesie twosie and they're just afraid. And I don't know that they're going to actually follow the rules that are being laid out. But EXP stance, to answer your question, I think is just very clear that we're not negotiating any longer. The negotiation of commissions is no longer between the brokerages. It's between in the contract between the buyer and the seller, and that's just the stance that they're taking.
So in decision-making theory, right? There's always a ripple effect to the decision. So like where do you guys see kind of as that hard stance? What's the ripple effect of that? Like what do we see from an agent perspective? What do we see? Is the real threat of a race to the bottom, right? Because most agents can't compete on value, compete on price. Does that start to just drive everything down? So like what's the ripple effect of this decision?
Again, it comes down. There's going to be some agents that handle this completely differently. They go to the listing, they go to take a listing and they say, listen, I'm going to be negotiating on your behalf. And when we get an offer that comes in, you're going to want me negotiating on your behalf to negotiate the least amount that you can possibly pay. Some agents are going to take that stance. It's not what I would recommend to do because I think you're setting yourself up for failure. I think you need to be preparing your client that it is most likely that they're going to ask for that to be that concession to be paid. So, it's going to be interesting to see how each agent individually does this. But I think you'd be crazy to go on a listing appointment and not prepare the seller that they're going to be asking for concessions of a certain amount and to prepare them for what that looks like in the net sheet. The ripple effects. Yeah. There's probably going to be, more steering from agents. I think then there's always been steering, but, some agents are going to steer away from where they have to be better negotiators and better skilled at their job. And they're going to steer clients away from certain companies' listings potentially if they don't believe they're going to be able to get paid. And that's the piece that I want to really see how it plays out. But certainly I think it's a realistic expectation. I'd love to get your opinion, Jeff, on this too. There's going to be probably a lesser amount paid to the buy side on average than there has been in the past.
Yep.
Simply because agents are not the greatest negotiators of their own fee. They're oftentimes willing to give it away anyway. So, What are your thoughts on that?
I was just with a seller last night, and the seller said to me, "Well, what is the average listing offering out right now?" Because our MLS, by the way, has already gone early. Our MLS, we're already living in this land. But our MLS is allowing concessions. So we're just seeing a lot of, in agent remarks, seller to pay up to 3% towards buyer's cost, or seller to pay 3% towards buyer cost. So the logic from the seller side was, well, what are you seeing on average? And, I'm seeing numbers that range anywhere from 1.5% to 3%. I think that if I had to pick a number that's average, probably 2.25%, which, by the way, is about 0.75 of a point less than what it was 3 months ago. So, right. I do think you're going to see the offering amount, whether it's commissions advertised through a sign writer or concessions. I do think you're going to see us probably hover somewhere in that 2 to 2.5 range, where for the last several decades, we've been in the 2.75 to 3 range, which then it comes down to, okay, so did you have the conversation with your buyer up front that your fee is blank, and if you can't negotiate the difference, they are covering that. The buyer's covering that out of their closing costs, and that's what we're teaching right now, helping agents understand that, have that conversation up front that you're going to do everything you can to get your fee covered. And there may be some scenarios where you don't get it all covered. And in a scenario where you don't get it all covered, you're going to be responsible for paying the difference as part of your closing costs.
Right. Yep.
So,
and that's what we've always done. That's how we've always taught agents to negotiate.
Right. We just never really had to enforce it, because in most markets, with the exception of like maybe Seattle or I know Washington DC, super competitive. You haven't really had to go back. This is what's new to all agents. You've never really had to go back to the buyer and ask them to pay the difference, because maybe you get shorted once out of every 20 deals, once every 30 deals, and you just live with it, and you don't go back and ask the buyer for the difference. At least that's been customary in a lot of Midwest markets where, of course, I'm from. But now it's going to be the norm. And that's the thing. I'm trying to help agents understand. I know it might feel icky to you to go back and ask your buyer to pay the difference, but that's because that hasn't been the norm. Well, now that that's the norm, you don't need to feel icky about that at all. That's just the way we do business now moving forward.
So Al, give some context to what Jeff was saying right there, and kind of what we know to be true, right? I love that. It's kind of icky, right? That's how they feel until they can get over that feeling, and it's more of that, amateur pro, mindset, and professionals, get paid. And so in those scenarios to where you have to go back, and I think where my mind immediately goes, just because we grew up in a seller concession market. I mean, that's just our DNA is hardwired into that from Lawton, Oklahoma. Like, buyers couldn't get into homes without the seller concessions, period. And so, as an agent, just with the fiduciary, the responsibility, like, are you going to get in the way of not getting your full fee when the buyers don't have the extra cash to pay you? Like, what are all of kind of the scenarios or options? Do you offer payment plans? Do you like where are you going to kind of see things going on the creative deal structure, creative financing as a buyer's agent to get compensated, and not just race to the bottom, right? We know that that's one play, right? You can just go do it for nothing. We know people will pay you to do something for nothing. So we don't want to compete on that, but we're talking about holding firm to our fees and not getting in the way of a VA, FHA, first-time home buyer that just really doesn't have the extra funds. Like, how do you see that kind of playing out to get compensated?
Well, it's going to be financed like it has for 30 years. I mean, ultimately, we're a lot of people up in arms that the brokers aren't sharing commissions. The truth of it is, when you really look at it, sellers have been paying both sides of the commission forever. And then if you want to look at it from a different perspective, you can say that the buyer's paying it because it's coming out of the seller's closing costs, and they're looking at their net the whole time. That's so right. Would the seller would sellers for the last 30 years have taken less for their home if they hadn't had to pay a commission of 3%, 4%, 5%, 6%, 7%, whatever was being charged? Yes, they would have.
Looking at the market value. Yeah.
Right. So I'd like to push back on some folks out there that feel. And I'm not sure if this is exactly your take, Jeff, but on having to put a actual amount in anywhere. And here's my stance on it. First of all, I want to say that when I heard our MLS was only allowing a yes or no box for concessions, it annoyed me a little bit. I was like, why would you do that? Why would you just say yes or no?
Yeah.
I thought, if you're going to have a concession, because when we were, kind of coming up in, I would say, the mid 2000s, like you were alluding to, John, I mean, it wasn't uncommon to have 3% coming back for buyers' closing costs. And
it would be in the remarks. I remember we would put listings that seller offering $5,000 concessions to the buyer. Like, you put that right in the remarks.
Yep. Remember, some lenders were allowing 6%. The lenders were getting rich because they were just financing their own fees into their closing costs, and they were going to max it out to whatever Fannie Mae allowed or the underwriter allowed. So let's take a step back from this stuff. Now, what would it look like if this was easy? In my opinion, what it would look like if it was easy is as a listing agent, you go in and negotiate your fee. Okay. A buyer's agent can't start working with a buyer. Well, no, they can, but they can't really, within the legal new bounds, start actually representing that buyer and write an offer and expect to actually get paid unless they have a buyer's rep signed up front with an agreed upon price that they were going to charge, whatever the fee is. Maybe it's a flat fee or it's a percentage. So if we can agree that the new landscape is that if a buyer agent is coming in to show a listing and they've already negotiated their fee with the buyer, why would this listing agent even worry about putting anything in there as long as it's a yes? Now, I agree that there should be seller concessions, yes or no, but let's just say they even had no. Everything's negotiable. Everything's negotiable. Price is negotiable. Terms are negotiable. Closing costs are negotiable. Concessions are negotiable. I guess my pushback on putting a price in there, any kind of a percentage or whatever, and advertising that, is that let's just say a buyer's agent comes into one of my listings and they had I don't even know what they negotiated with the buyer. It could be $1. It could be 1%, 2%, 3%. I don't know what their agreement is. They don't send that to me. So I have no idea what their agreement is, but they come in and show the property. And I told the seller, I think your best bet is to offer a 3% or 2% or whatever. And here their agreement says 1%. I just buried an extra, I basically just took an extra 2% out of my seller's pocket, potentially in that scenario. Now, this is just pretend scenarios. Don't everyone get all upset. We're not talking about price fixing here. We're talking about scenarios so we can understand how to move forward the right way. Mm-hmm. I believe that if it's negotiable, it's negotiable. Buyer's agent has already an agreement with their buyer. They should come in and negotiate those fees to be paid. And if that's what they want done, now you can put an offer or 2 or 3 in front of the sellers and say, here's the net on this one. Here's the net on this one. This financing looks shaky. This one's a cash deal, or this one's like, 20% down, whatever it is. And then let the seller make a decision that's best for them based upon the information they have. They can choose to counter one of those offers. And I believe that that's the easiest way to do it versus, so I've flip-flopped my position.
Okay. All right. You ready for my response to that?
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. I got 2 thoughts on that. Number one, while in essence, both parties are paying, the seller offering concessions is money from their proceeds. A buyer having to pay a commission at closing is money out of their pocket. To me, those are 2 different things. I know they're the same financially, but to the average consumer, those are 2 different things. I'm getting less proceeds, or I'm paying less out of pocket. Paying more out of pocket is much more painful than getting a check that's $10,000 less. So that to me is one thought. The other side of it is if there's a number that becomes kind of an average concession amount offered, let's just say the number's 2. Well, then that means when we talk about this race to the bottom, well, then that means I'm already at least getting at least that amount. So that way, when I have a conversation with my buyer, when I'm trying to help them understand the value in paying me 2.5, 3, 3.5, whatever that number is, it's much easier for me to get a buyer to say, okay, yeah, that makes sense. And oh, by the way, when I can say, hey, in your price range, the average seller's offering about 2% to 2.5% in concessions. So hopefully we'll be able to get this whole amount or most of this paid. They're going to be more likely to say to me or my agents, you know what, let's do it. I'm excited to let you go to work for me. If there's a ton of uncertainty to where every situation is a negotiation, here's what's going to happen. And by the way, as a listing agent, I've been a listing agent my 22-year career. I was lucky to have a broker that said from day one, listers last, buyers pay. Isn't that funny how that's now true? We get buyers pay. All right. In the reverse. That buyer, if they don't have at least some assurance through evidence in the MLS of what kind of a consensus number of what's being offered in concessions, that buyer in a lot of cases is going to go right to the listing agent, which is great. I love it. As a listing agent, bring it on. But having agents in the market, just like you guys have agents in your networks, and I have agents on my team, no matter, we can script practice until we're blue in the face. there's going to be a certain percentage of buyers, and I already believe it's going to be about 1 out of every 7. All right. That's just an estimate I'm throwing out there. I think it's going to be more than 1 out of every 10. I don't think it's going to be more than 1 out of every 5. I think it's going to be about 1 out of every 7 buyers. No matter what you tell them, they're going to go straight to the listing agent. The client I had last night, a well-educated client. I mean, I wouldn't say super high-end, but an educated client. When I explained the whole process, she looked me in the face. She said, why would I want to mess around with any uncertainty with a buyer's agent? I'd just go right to the listing agent. In my mind, I'm like, I understand that. I probably would too. So those are the 2 reasons, in my opinion, why I think it's good for our industry, Albie, for us to have a concession amount marketed in the MLS in advance, and that number doesn't have to cover all of my buyer's fees, but it should cover the majority of it, and that would be good for the overall industry, in my opinion, and that's what
Jeff. You mentioned earlier, kind of, you would do it and pay the penalty. What are the penalties right now? If you kind of go against the MLS guidelines, what
I don't know. What I meant by that is, listen, I'm not looking to welcome any lawsuits into my life here, but what I meant by that is, if I have the NAR and the Department of Justice telling me it's okay, and there's some stupid MLS rule that says we don't care, we're going against this, I would take the fine and I would probably go right to an attorney and say I'd fight that.
Right.
And I'm with you. When you were saying that, my mind went to what Nike did with Jordan, right?
Yeah.
We'll pay the fine for every game, right?
Yeah.
Until the
rule. I don't think I would do that, because how MLSs are. I mean, they and if Detroit's my hometown, if I can't be in the Detroit MLS, I got a problem. But I think no different than the attorneys that got involved to change this. It could be no different than the challenging the MLS on their policy if it doesn't match what NAR and the Department of Justice says is okay.
Yeah. No, I love it.
Interesting thought on the 1 out of 7, because the way I always looked at it was, I don't know what the number is today, but buyers, if they know the property that they want, right? Like, they generally don't when they come to us, right? They haven't found the perfect property when we're having that first sit down. And so they don't know which house they're going to end up buying. But it was pretty rare. I would say it was maybe 1 out of 20 times and maybe less than that a buyer would come to me as the listing agent. Yeah. And I was a lister. I had tons of listings. We had 200 listings at one time. They rarely would come to me and try to bypass the agent. Usually they had a relationship. They had been looking at lots of property, and they came to us in that negotiation. So it seems to me that it would be, less, it would be more likely, but still unlikely that you're going to have that many people that find the property before the agent negotiates the deal. What is your thought process around thinking that these buyers are going to start changing the way they've done it all these years? Because they don't buy a house every, but maybe on average every 7 years. So they don't really know the process, and maybe they're a little bit more educated or have more questions now, having seen all of this. But what do you think is going to happen that's different?
So Jay, just to give you an idea, and I listen, you're like the king of the listing side. So I love being on this session with you. Right now, we're carrying about 250 listings active right now. We double end 1 out of every 23 right now. So you're not far off on, you said about 1 out of every 20. We double end 1 out of every 23. And so where I came up with this 1 out of 7 idea is based on the fact that it's safe to say that at least 1 out of every 10 consumers we do business with is extremely savvy, right? I think that's safe to say, no matter what price point you're in, if you look at your last 10 closing, you probably had 1 out of the 10 that was super savvy, or above all the rest. And then you're going to have a couple others that are pretty savvy, and they're kind of on the up and up, but they still, need our help or whatever. And then of course you have all of the rest. And so I think that if you just look at that simple fact, if 3 or 4 out of 10 are pretty savvy, and they're hearing, because of course, the media is going to pick this all up again, August 17th. Hey, it's official, whatever. They're hearing that they can get a better deal. We've already heard this objection our entire careers as it is. So now we have another reason to hear this objection. I think it's safe to say that at least 10%, no less than 20%, are going to do everything they can to cut out what they might consider the middleman and go right to the listing agent. And then they have, at least in their mind, substantially less risk of having to pay a buyer broker fee, or if they do have to pay a little bit more to have the listing agent represent them, it's substantially just using their savvy mind, it's substantially less than what they'd have to pay to have their own agent.
Right. Gotcha.
Yeah. Now, this is speculation. I could be
right. Yeah. It's certainly.
This is just on the ground field experience of speculation. Right. Honestly, it's based on conversations that I'm having right now with buyers and sellers. I mean, I think it's safe to say 1 out of every 7 listings is going to be double-ended. Could be a little more, could be a little less.
I think you're spot on. And this was it's kind of alluding to before we hit go. Was talking to one of our very dear friends who's massive producer, and that was his take. Right? Was that all it's going to do is they're just going to drive buyers as they because it's consumer behavior, right? So my question would is like, how long before that behavior starts to change, right? We know buyers value, they want their agent to find the ideal home for them, negotiate, for them for the price and terms that they want. At what point does the behavior, if it falls in, if they can find the ideal home on their own, and they feel they can negotiate better, where does that behavior start to change?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the thing. Most of them can. I mean, Zillow is updated the second it's updated in the MLS, and consumers understand that.
Yeah. So if that happens, right, so more buyers start going, what potential lawsuits start to open up? Hey, you're my listing agent. Oh, and as a seller, are you in my best interest? Now you're representing the buyer as well. So, where do you see that potentially opening up a can of lawsuit?
So what I think is going to happen, well, first, a few lawsuits will probably fuel this, and every state handles dual agency and all this differently. But, I think what you're going to see is the states that maybe don't have a certain level of dual agency or a clean procedure for representing both sides. I think they're going to have to come up with some new document. I mean, I know, like, for instance, in Michigan, the seller signs a document at the listing table that says they understand that I could also represent the buyer. Doesn't mean I'm going to. It just says they absolutely acknowledge and understand that I could represent the buyer. So something as simple as that, maybe I don't want to call it a blanket because, every state might handle it differently, but I think you're going to have to see the states step in and create a new process for how dual agency, or at least even if it's not dual agency, how do you represent the other side of the transaction? If they don't have an agent, then they
100%.
want to move forward.
Al, what were you going to say?
Well, I mean, I literally was just before this podcast, an hour before, I was chatting with Leo Perea, our CEO, and I asked the exact same question. I asked it a little bit differently, but I started shaking my head when you said dual agency. Now, as just a personal practice, professional practice, maybe the first part of my career, I practiced dual agency when the opportunity presented itself. And then I stopped. Like you, like Jay, John, we're listing agents. I was a listing sold. I mean, I just went out and hit listings. Mm-hmm. And one of my value propositions was I'm not going to act as a dual agent. Many other agents, I'm allowed to do it. Our brokerage allows us to do it, but I personally don't do it. If a buyer wants to come and purchase your home, I will represent only you, and I will write the contract up, make sure it gets across the finish line. And this is my fee in that scenario. Mm-hmm. That's the way I practiced for, I don't know how many years, at least 15 of my 21-year-old of sales.
Yep.
I asked Leo, said, why did that in this lawsuit and the DOJ and all the pressure that we're getting on changing our procedures to make it more fair, they're saying, I guess, for the buyer, why wouldn't they just do away with dual agency? If they really want to protect the buyer and seller and the consumer, I mean, one attorney won't even represent a wife and a husband in a divorce. They just won't do it. It's unheard of. Now there's mediators, but those aren't attorneys. I suppose some of them could be attorneys. Yeah. You can't negotiate on both sides fairly when you know what the other side's holding the cards on. So if they wanted to make this new era easy, just get rid of agency altogether. That will force buyers that want the representation. They're going to have to get an agent. They're going to have to sit down, hear their spiel, listen to their value proposition, and hire them if they want representation. Or buyer beware. Go directly to the listing agent. There is no dual agency anymore. And roll the dice and see where they come up. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, that for sure is a possibility, but I think what will happen before that, and again, every state's different. So some people might be listening or watching and saying, well, we already have that. There's probably going to be a simple one-page document that says that the buyer understands they're waiving their right to representation, and therefore they're holding the brokerage, its agents, and everyone harmless, and da-da-da-da-da. So at a minimum, that should be introduced, if not by your state, probably by your brokerage, because there's going to be so much. Again, going back to, it's a prediction, we're not there yet, but there's going to be so many buyers going straight to the listing agents that if dual agency is not a thing that you're kosher with or that's normal in your state, then you better be getting a document signed by the buyer that absolutely, says they're waiving their right to representation and they can't come after you afterwards and all this other stuff.
Let me ask you this, Jeff. So let's say that this.
And by the way, that should be hard that shouldn't be hard to present to a buyer, because the whole thought process, they're coming directly to the listing agent to save money on services. So they're no longer getting those services. So therefore they're right. So to me, that's a logical way.
But think about this. If they come to you as the listing agent and they say, we don't want to ask for any concession, and you're you're representing the buy side or dual agency or however that looks in your state, how are you going to handle that scenario with
the listing agreement? Yep.
On the listing
agreement. Should an unrepresented buyer show up to purchase your home, the amount that you're being charged for us to handle both sides of the transaction is blank. We don't say a word about dual agency. I mean, that would be the time to talk about dual agency, but it doesn't matter whether that agent wants representation or not. Should an unrepresented buyer show up, and that goes right in the listing agent, and that can absolutely be spelled out. I mean, you could still charge 6% right now to handle the whole, you know what I mean? Obviously, you're not going to be competitive if you do, but that's spelled out in the listing agreement, Jay.
Right. Gotcha.
No, I love it. Yeah. Just kind of, thinking about, where that's going to go and what could happen. I mean, it's a lot of the scenarios, but I think, default back to the best practice, right? Consultative approach, get clear on their goals, and then, be able to just really articulate, how things are, have those tough, they always say tough conversations. They're not tough if you have them on the front end. No. They get tough if you skip them, right? It's just the whole skipping steps presents the illusion of speed. It's going to come back and get you at some point. Might as well address it on the front end and being able to just really stay at the forefront of that. So as we kind of look at this moving in, what should agents like? There's a lot of noise, right? And I think, this opportunity for the four of us here to just like, hey guys, it's all about accurate thought. Don't fall into, the narrative, don't fall into the noise. This is facts, right? This is what you need to be thinking about. Like if we were to give some actionable, like thought process to agents moving into the future, like, hey, make sure you're thinking about it this way. What would you guys say about that, Al?
It's get trained. Mike Reese said it best, and I know, Jeff, you're known for your scripts, dialogues, boots on the ground strategies, and the feedback that I hear is, that's what you guys focus on, and the thing that Mike Reese, I love it. We throw it around this term a lot, is that you don't want someone who is half trained to disarm a bomb. You want them fully trained. If they're, if your life depends on it and the guy next to you is only half trained, you're not wanting to go into that job to disarm the bomb, right? You want fully trained Navy SEAL type of training to it's going to mitigate litigation, which this is a sidebar. I believe that not only did these attorneys, the plaintiff's attorneys, just grossly win ridiculously big. They're the only winners in all this, but also the future litigation that's going to come from this. There's going to be a lot. And most of that's going to come from untrained agents. We call them AFAs, average fucking agents, who don't stick their nose in one training. They don't come to it. They're a lot of them are unethical. They're looking for workarounds. They're not going to their broker's training. They're not going to Glover U. They're not coming to RNAEAs. They're, and actually sharpening their sword. And they're going to get their brokers in trouble, and they're going to end up in court. And I think that a lot of independents, the small independents, aren't going to be able to write big checks for $200,000, $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 when that fine comes through. You know, the big companies, the Kellers, the EXPs, the Berkshires, whatever, they can write the check. But most of the small indies can't weather that storm of that large check. So I believe that the answer is to get educated. I believe that and Jeff, I know that you have programs that you're training your buyers agents like Navy SEALs. We've been training our buyers agents like Navy SEALs. We have the certified home buying advisor that literally it's a proven system that will walk the buyer through the process and articulate the value. So what Jay used to say is, so they run through red lights to want to work for you at your terms, at your fee. If you had a system that you could follow, if agents all followed a system like that, I don't think anyone would have anything to worry about. That's my opinion. And we know how this is going to go.
Right.
Some will stick their toe in and some are going to go all in. So
that gets to my question. I'd love to hear what you have to say on this, Jeff. Are you teaching? First of all, what are you teaching? And then what percentage of agents do you think are going to do one-time agreements or one-day agreements versus, signing up a long-term agreement? Like we taught for forever this is our fee. If you don't buy a house, you don't owe us anything. But if you do, we charge X percent. Yeah. And we guarantee and we had risk reversal built in. We guarantee to get that paid for by the seller or it's free or we don't charge it.
And I think too, because before we let Jeff kind of, expand upon that, I think the big thing that agents hearing this need to understand, in the absence of value, people question price. What is the value that you're actually providing for them, right? That's in the Buyer's Advantage program. And what is all in there, what needs to be in there, what needs to be innovated, what needs to be added, what needs to be done to accommodate a buyer in today's market that is super important to them, to remove that fear to where they see the value of wanting to work with you, not bypassing you, not being one of the 7 that goes directly to the seller. And I think that's super, super important to understand, is like, well, how I can't justify my fees because you haven't thought through all the value that you actually provide and able to give to this client. So, I just want to make sure that everybody listening in understands, okay, well, what is my value proposition to a buyer in today's market that's important to them?
Yeah. So I'll just kind of reiterate a couple of things there. Number one, I have up in front of me on my screen, and it's been here for like 2 weeks, 2 Google Docs. One says presenting the new compensation to sellers. The other one says presenting the new compensation to buyers. And all of our agents, I know this sounds cheesy. I know it sounds 1990s. I know it sounds whatever. All of our agents, no different than how we learned how to master the listing presentation and the buyer consultation. All of our agents, 3 days a week for our experienced agents, 5 days a week for our new agents, are writing it out 1 time a week or 1 time a day. They're chanting it once a day and they're role playing it once a day. And this started like 2 weeks ago. And we're going to be fully ready to deliver any sort of language that we need to when we go on an appointment with a buyer or seller today. So mastering the new language of presenting the new compensation model to sellers, mastering the new compensation model to buyers. That's number one. The second thing is this gives us all an opportunity to update our value proposition, just as you guys were talking about. So every single person listening or watching should be looking at, okay, when I go on a listing appointment today, what am I bringing? When I go meet with a buyer for a buyer consultation, what am I bringing? What am I presenting? And it's probably time that gets an upgrade, especially given the changes. And then I would say that the third thing that we're paying attention to, or at least, putting some stock into or spending some time looking at, is looking at what the best of the best in the markets around the country are doing and how they're handling it. And, right now, when I go on a listing appointment, I can explain to a seller that we will not be competitive as a seller if we're offering a number less than blank in concessions. And let me show you an example of your active listings that are all offering at least blank in concessions. So really understanding what the competition is doing and being able to articulate that.
Yeah. So key. And I think, one of the things that I'm seeing really, really rise, and I think, us, Al, getting to listen to Chris Voss last week, just brought that back up, that how important to negotiate the right way. how critical and how important that is as a skill to develop, right? You said trained, obviously the articulation, the value proposition, articulate your value, but also I think a negotiation skill. And then the other skill that I'm seeing bubbling up, and we know this just because, all of us on here, we're marketers first, is the art of storytelling. I think the art of storytelling is so critical right now to be able to, like you said, Jeff, to be able to share that story, that example of what we're seeing, and share the examples. I think our testimonials, our reviews, our case studies are so important right now, to be able to, maintain, to continue to build trust, right? Understand your offer process, and the buyers and sellers need to see credibility. They need to see proof, because trust is really at an all-time low.
Yep, that's right. Yeah, and I think I forgot to mention also, and I know it came up or the question was asked, we're still following the ALM model: appointment first, location second, motivation third, which means in order to show the house, it's going to be a one property address agreement to go meet with the buyer. And, that's how we're going to start the relationship off. And from there, assuming we want to work with them, we're going to move forward with encouraging the buyer consultation and get the full exclusive signed at that time. But initially, we're not going to hit them with an exclusive agreement up front.
Jeff, kind of expand upon that. Explain the rationale. Explain the why behind that, so people, it makes sense to them.
Yeah. So if you just put yourself in the shoes of the buyer, first of all, you got everything at your fingertips as it is. But really, if you want to go see this house, you've never met me, you don't know whether I'm a good agent or not, you're probably not going to enter into a 3-month exclusive agreement to buy a house with me. And so you're going to enter into an agreement that says, should you buy this one house, this is how the fees work, and we're going to do everything we can to get that negotiated. So hopefully you don't have to pay anything at all. And, let's take a look at this house, and then we'll go from there. And from there, they could move on. They could drop us, or we could decide we don't want to work with them. But if we do decide we want to work with them, then we would use the language to encourage a buyer consultation would be the next step. And that's where we would go through our whole value. And that's when we would explain, the value of having an exclusive buyer agency agreement with us. Even if it was a short one, I'm not, necessarily saying it's got to be a 6-month agreement or whatever, but we're not starting off the relationship by shoving a contract down their throat and saying, sign this or else. They're going to have to sign it to see the house, but it's going to be just attached to that one house. And, I have a lot of agents that are like, well, even that seems like it might be a challenge. Well, watch. If everyone under the sun is putting some type of contract in front of your buyers, it's not going to be a challenge, because they're going to, how the first iteration of this, the first couple of weeks is, are you sure? Let me get back to you. And then they call their friend out in Texas or in Oklahoma or whatever. Hey, I heard about this. Is this true? I got to sign this before I see. Yeah, you're going to have to sign something, right? So initially, we may win some, we may lose some, but as time rolls on and this becomes kind of a new norm, buyers will be used to signing agreements in order to see a house with an agent, a buyer's agent.
Do you think that there's going to be a lot of agents that just do not adopt this as their best practice and try to work around it, or try to go show the property, or do you think, how long do you think it's going to take for this to get adopted by the agents? Because I think some agents are just not going to do it.
I think the second a buyer says, here's where here's where integrity is going to show up for somebody. The second a buyer says, I'll work with you. I'll see that house with you. I'll even pay you. But I ain't signing anything right now until after we meet, or until after I see that house. You're going to have to make a decision what you're going to do in that case. And yeah, I think there's probably going to be some agents that say, okay, let's go see the house, and they're going to risk it. Now, you guys may or not have been around, but when fair housing, although it's been around for a long time, but it was a thing, when I first started in the business, I was hearing left and right agents and brokerages getting secret shopped, and they were getting popped, and they were handing out fines. So, it's very possible that we could have some secret shoppers, and that's going to keep everyone honest.
Yep.
Yeah, it's funny you said that. I was re-listening to some of Bette David's stuff and Bally's, right? That they would get an email saying, "Hey, you're fired because you didn't handle the contract this way. If you want to challenge us, here's the video of the conversation." Yeah. And so it's a good point.
It's possible that there's going to be secret shoppers. To me, that makes sense, but who knows?
Yeah.
Yeah, just wrapping up a little here. Awesome conversation. Thank you so much for joining us, Jeff. I was in the car. I had a driver taking me from the Detroit Yacht Club to where the was it UWM arena or wherever.
Yeah. Yep.
And really great guys. And the one guy said, he's asked, what do you do? And this and that. And he goes, man, I was made so much money back in the day when I was selling Kirby vacuum cleaners. And I said, no kidding. You were a Kirby salesman. And so we ended up talking. Yeah. And I hired a real estate agent fresh out of real estate school when I had my brokerage, who was a top Kirby salesman at one point. Mm-hmm. And I was so fascinated with their training. You talk about training like a Navy SEAL. Mm-hmm. Kirby salespeople are the best salespeople I think I've ever seen. Yeah. They follow a system. And you had said this may seem cheesy. It's not cheesy. Yeah. That's how you train people like the Navy SEAls. Okay. Yeah. You do the same thing over and over and over again. Yeah. Kirby sales guys would have to come into the office. They would huddle and they would go over their what's called the front talk. And this is what they say in the first 4 minutes of knocking on the door. They got a heavy, 25, 30 pound vacuum cleaner that the person inside doesn't even probably think they need. And they got to go and try and door knock and sell that to them. Uh-huh. You can't just wing that. You have to be trained. And so the guy's name was Jeremy, great guy. And I literally I was like, I would not let him leave my office. I'm like, tell me about this training in the front talk. And so he did. I literally adopted obviously the exact words, but the flow of that front talk was exactly what I used on my listing appointments. It set the table to have a better conversation, an easier conversation on getting them to sign on the line that's dotted and become a client of mine. And we taught that to all my agents, and we would practice it every morning. We would literally just we'd rotate, and someone would have to go through the entire front talk. One of my other agents would throw an objection at him. We'd had fun with it. But I think that's the other thing is that, yes, have fun with the training. Treat it like a game. Yeah. Get good at it. Get competitive with yourself and just get better every single day and learn the scripts and dialogues, and life will be a lot easier for you.
I love it. Jeff, any final thoughts as we kind of wrap up here?
Listen, I think at the end of the day, we're just going to have to make sure we're staying ahead of the competition, which means paying attention to what the competition is doing. On the buy side, if you're afraid that maybe, because commissions are going to be driven down or whatever, no, I actually think you have a chance to make more as a buyer's agent, because now you have a reason to say, we've got an agreement where you're expected to pay the difference. So this really is a good thing all around. On the listing side, whether you believe in double ending listings or not, it's much easier to go on an appointment and say our commission is 3% than saying our commission is 6%. So there's some benefits on the listing side. And on the buy side, I think you absolutely can maintain a very fair commission so long as you're providing value. And a lot of people have been getting beat up with the MLS has been the wild, wild west in the last 12 months. A lot of commissions have been coming down anyway. So now you actually have a piece of paper that protects you that you might not have had before. And I think this is a good thing for both sides. I really do.
Me too. Cuz, take us home. What kind of final thoughts here as we wrap up?
Yeah, man. When I was talking, you were talking about the Kirby sales. I remember seeing that process, and it is all about demonstrating your value, and anything you can demonstrate. It's like when you look at like TV commercials, anything that you can run on TV and sell, they demonstrate, right? So like the boat, what's the stuff that you spray on the boat, the screen, and he drives the boat across. I know how that works because I can see what you're doing with that. I get it, right? It makes it a lot easier to sell.
ShamWow.
Yeah. No, it's not the ShamWow too. Yeah, but like that demonstration is the hard thing for us to do in real estate, because what we do isn't visible, but we have to learn how to make that value visible and articulate that in a way that people see all the value that we bring to the table if you want to earn the commission. And that's the skill that I think, everyone should be focused on, is how do we articulate the value that we're bringing to the table and be of the most value to your clients. If you're not adding value, then you're at risk of being irrelevant.
100%. And man, thank you guys. We've just kind of brought back kind of the whole theme around one big fire, and that stemmed with us almost a decade ago, and it is really the whole concept. We all have our individual fires, but when we come together, we're able to bring one big fire, and today's conversation was the exact living example of that. So appreciate you guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. You guys out there have any questions, feel free to hit us all up, reach out.
Jeff, how do they reach you if they want to learn more or go to some of your trainings? Is there a place you'd like us?
Yeah. Biggest, I would say, just follow me at Realtor Jeff Glover on Instagram or Facebook. And you can go to gloveru.com to see all of our stuff. We've got a ton of free resources. Every single NAR objection handler you could ever want is on there as well. So just go to gloveru.com.
Awesome.
Appreciate you, man.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. We'll see you guys.
See you guys.
Later.